Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's Climate Action webinar, Designed for Wildfire Resilience, created in partnership with the Climate Action Resilient Design Committee. AIA California recognizes that the planet is experiencing an urgent climate emergency and that California should continue to elevate its position as a global leader in addressing the grave challenges of advancing climate change. To help do this, AIA California has developed an in-depth educational climate action webinar series that incorporates the AIA framework for design excellence and includes zero net carbon design education. To qualify for continuing education credit, AIA California provides the learning objectives for every webinar and includes them in the PDF presentation that can be made available online. Quick housekeeping reminders. Today's session is being recorded and will be posted on the AIA California website, www.aiacalifornia.org, along with any other additional resources shortly after today's session. Today's session qualifies for 1.5 AIA HSW learning units for those watching live, and AIA California staff will report these units for you. Please use the Q&A function to ask any questions for today's presenters. You can also like a question to move it to the top of the queue. Questions that are not answered in the webinar can be made available on our website. I'd now like to introduce our moderator for today's webinar. Libby Barnes, AIA Lead AP, is chair of the AIA Monterey Bay Committee on the Environment and a member of the AIA California Climate Action Committee, focused on education around resilient design. Libby is a California licensed architect specializing in green residential and commercial architecture. Libby has devoted her career to sustainable design, along with 20+ years of advocacy work around green buildings, neighborhoods, and resilient and equitable communities. She currently works for Workbench, a design build company in Santa Cruz, California. Libby, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. In recent years, California has seen the wildfire season expand beyond a few months to the entire calendar year. And conditions in spring and early summer give an early indication of the severity of what lies ahead. One approach to mitigating future wildfire disasters is to reduce the chances that homes ignite when wildfires occur nearby, such as through the creation and maintenance of defensible space, areas free of excess dead vegetation, and fire-wise landscaping strategies around homes and structures. Maintaining defensible space not only helps to protect that home, it also reduces the risk that wildfire will spread to neighboring homes, thereby helping to protect communities. Resilient design has become another layer and challenge to our design profession. Architects, civil engineers, and landscape architects play a critical role in designing defensible spaces that are functional, aesthetically attractive, considerate of local ecologies, and integrate sustainable practices. Today, we have 3 experts talking about resilient design and their firsthand experience with wildfire mitigation. We will see how one community on the central coast of California has managed to make their properties both safe and attractive. I'd like to now introduce our speakers for today. Seth Parker is a CA licensed A General Engineering, B Building, C 27 Specialized Landscape, a CAL FIRE certified licensed timber operator, a CAL FIRE fire line safety certified heavy equipment operator, and an NFPA certified structure ignition specialist. He teaches that fire is good and that we can coexist with fire without severe loss. His techniques are simple, cost-effective, and based on the home ignition zone. He writes fuel management plans and home ignition hazard reports, as well as implementing the work recommended in those reports. His customers include insurance providers, homeowners, HOAs, USFS, CAL FIRE, municipalities, and fire safe councils, just to name a few. Our next speaker will be Emily Aiken. Emily is a fire and fuels management specialist whose work is focused on preparing for wildfires through home hardening, defensible space, and community engagement at the Santa Lucia Preserve on the Monterey Peninsula. Her background in mapping wildfires alongside CAL FIRE Type 1 incident management teams as a certified geographic information system specialist and Wildland Firefighter Type 2, has bolstered her position as a preserves liaison, where she works closely with local fire agencies on wildfire pre-planning and conducting wildfire safety inspections. In addition, Emily spearheaded the preserve's establishment as a nationally recognized FireWise USA community, and she coordinates the lot-specific fuel management plan initiative, where homeowners take steps above and beyond the California state minimum requirements for defensible space, while simultaneously maintaining the natural beauty and health of the landscape. And finally, we have Division Chief Kevin Kamnikar. In 1992, Division Chief Kamnikar was hired as a volunteer with Monterey County Regional Fire District. And in 1995, he was hired as a full-time firefighter. Throughout his career, he has advanced through the ranks of lieutenant, captain, and in March of 2019, was promoted to Division Chief Fire Marshal. Kevin holds an AS degree in fire science from Monterey Peninsula College, a BS degree in fire administration from Columbia Southern University, and many certifications through the California Office of the State Fire Marshal, including Fire Officer and Chief Officer. We are very excited to hear from our speakers today. So Seth, please take it away.
Hello, everyone. Is my screen up? Oh, wait, there we go. We up? Anybody?
Yep, looks great, Seth.
Thank you. As Libby mentioned, I'm an NFPA certified structure ignition hazard specialist. And I thought that is a great place to start with you guys. This audience is particularly inclined to benefit from some of these post building assessments. If you could look at them going in as you're designing and make them a part of the design, they'll help the homeowner for a long time to come. So let's start with the very first one, which is, whoops, the overview of surroundings. Think about where your structure is being sited and how it's being sited. Is it at the top of a chimney? If it is, maybe you can push it back a little bit. Or maybe you don't put that wood deck out off the front. And then, kind of look around and see what is the history in that area. What's the fire history, and see if there's something there that you can put into your designs to make it a little bit safer for them. Possibly the driveway. You could change the driveway so it's easier to get in and to get out of, or you just have to see how each site can benefit from that little bit of forethought. And then think of your type of construction. If you're in someplace that is regularly catching fire, maybe your materials, instead of being, I want to have it wonderful and rough wood or something like that, maybe your materials are stucco or something else that is a little bit more resilient. The home ignition structure assessment is just basically 5 questions. And so we're going to go through them, but you just kind of start at the top and you work your way down. And so we're at Chimney and Eaves. So you want to inspect the roof, make sure it's, not non-combustible. Another thing, a lot of people like those tile roofs. Everything comes with its own kind of benefit and cost, right? So those tile roofs are really fire resistant, but a lot of times birds can make nests in the little openings. And if an ember gets in there and lights that nest on fire, it may be an access point to some of the roofing membranes, and those are oftentimes very flammable. Tar paper or some sort of expandable foam or, you know, insulation. All of those things are flammable. So you really want to kind of look at the application and make sure that there are no holes in that intention. Another one is metal. Metal roofs are great, but if they sit in the hot sun all day, they swell, and then they get, you know, they shrink in the cold evenings. And so you'll start to have little distortions, and they'll lift up and create little places where if, say, for instance, there's a gutter there and there's some leaves in the gutter and the leaves start on fire and that metal is separated, then all of a sudden you have that access into your house. So you really want to maintain, you know, maintenance is a big part of fire prevention. So you really want to maintain the house. And back to the architect, at the architect level, think about what that maintenance cost is, time and money. You know, everybody has a limited amount of time and money. And so anything you guys can do in your designs to reduce that maintenance load is going to help a lot in terms of fire prevention. So chimney and eaves, litter on the roof, that's another one. Like if you're building, if your site is under canopy and there's a lot of leaf litter, you know, really think about what that roof is going to look like. You know, make sure there's not all sorts of little nooks and crannies that leaves and or in the future embers can get trapped in and cause ignition, right? And then also, once again, the maintenance, right? So you don't want to have someone have to, every time the wind blows, go up on the roof and clean leaves. And gutters are a big, I see a lot of homes that have more gutters than they need. So, you know, if you have a roof line that's over your front door, well, of course you want a gutter. You don't want water sheeting off when you come home in the rain. However, if you have a second story and it's on top of that tile roof that we just talked about, and you have a gutter up there that's filling with leaves, every time somebody has to walk up on that tile, they risk breaking the tile and having all sorts of secondary problems. And they will need to get into that gutter and clean it regularly. Also, I'm not a big fan, just throwing this out there, of those gutter guards, because people don't clean their gutters if they have the gutter guards on, and they still get debris in them, and they'll still get stuff, and they can still catch on fire. So not a big fan of the gutter guards. Top of the exterior wall to the foundation. This is really important. There's usually like vents or some sort of windows or you know, I guess doors too. All sorts of different stuff that can let in embers. So windows are interesting. The reason they're a problem is because they swell, they expand in the heat, and the frames don't, so they crack and then fall out, and then embers get into your house and then ignite your house, right? So you want to protect the windows and their integrity. There's not a whole lot of advantage. There's the double pane windows, and some of them are fire rated, but I think they add like, it's like 30 seconds, 34 seconds or something like that of additional resistance when put against that 2000 degree flame. So the thing is that you don't want to put a window in front of a toilet that someone's going to have to put a tree in front of under an eave, because you know the eaves really are not the thing. They aren't, as you hear about, they're an ignition risk, but the ignition risk is really the plants or whatever you have underneath them. They ignite and the heat gets trapped in the eaves, and that's how the house ignites, right? It's not really that an ember is going to come up and hit the eaves and start the structure fire. Eaves are high, embers will fall to the ground, so it's just really not the problem. The problem is that somebody sticks something up and under them. Crawl spaces, again, you know, if mice can get in, then embers can get in. So if you have mice and stuff running around underneath your house, you might want to think about, how do I seal this up, right? A big cause of structure fire is the embers. In fact, my understanding is it's 9 out of 10 structures lost to wildfire are due to low intensity ground fire and embers. And there's a caveat that once the first house gets started, it's house to house, but that original house is started by embers. So, the crawl spaces, eaves, vents, if the embers get in underneath the structure, oftentimes they'll sit down there and, all the fire department is there and they're working the head and they push the fire past the community or the structure and they go running down the road, fighting the fire. And a day or two later, that ember that went under your house cooks off and ignites, and it's a small fire and nobody sees it because everybody's either evacuated or down the road fighting the big fire. And all of a sudden your house catches on fire, where the fire was 2 days ago. So that's why you really want to lock those down, because oftentimes there's no one there to do anything about those embers, right? And by the time somebody is there, it's too late. Walls and attachments, the HIZ, when they did that, the testing for that, they found that the 2000 degree, 200-foot crown fire at 100 feet didn't even char the wood siding that they built. They built little structures at different distances to see what the effects were. At 30 feet, it would actually, the siding would ignite, but in the 50 seconds it took to burn the fuel and move on, the radiant heat was not very efficient. And so the fire would just drop out at 30 feet. And then that 5 feet of the HIZ is the embers and low intensity ground fire, which really does all the damage. And why that's really, really important is, think about that. If most 9 out of 10 structures ignite because of something in that 5-foot space, that gives us and the homeowners a really attainable area to create defense, right? It's 5 feet. It's the structure out to 5 feet. A lot of people are looking down the road at their neighbor's big tree or this or that. And I tell people all the time, turn around and look at the wall of your house, walk around. It's 0 to 5 feet. So, decks, everybody knows to be careful about decks. One of the biggest problems with decks, usually the decks they aren't that ignitable. Embers can land on them. You'll see burn marks all over decks after a fire, and the deck survives. What happens is that people stick things under the decks, right? You store wood, or you have a deck that is really inaccessible, and so you have years of leaf litter built up under it, some variation on that, and then in comes the little ember or the low intensity ground fire, ignites that, sets the deck on fire, then the deck catches the house on fire. Back to flammable material next to or under the structure. That's what we just talked about. Fences are really great. Everybody's fence always ends at your house, right? So it's kind of like a little pathway for the flame to get to the structure. I was telling someone, hey, you got to watch out for your wooden gates, and maybe we should put a metal gate on it and do this and do that. And they said, well, how about I open it? And I was like, brilliant. There you go. Open it, so that continuity, that fuel continuity is disrupted, and that little roadway to your house gets broken, right? Again, crawl spaces, attics, vents, soffits, whenever you're in there, look for, leaves, animals, anything like that. If they're in there, embers can be in there. You need to take a look at how to seal that up a little better. Nooks, crannies, and other small spaces. If you can in your design, avoid them. There's something that needs to be watched. So try and avoid those gotcha design elements. This is a great picture. Look at that. They probably fired off of the house away from the community, but it looks great, right? The fire just came right up and nobody got burned. It's amazing. So the foundation to the immediate landscaped area, this is really where it happens, right? This is the zero of the zero. Ignition happens at the confluence between the structure and the environment. So when you're doing design, especially landscape, you know, give a little bit of a wide berth there. If you can, patios and hardscapes are ideal, but flame length is generally considered twice fuel length. And so if you have a 6-inch high ground cover and move it, stop it 12 inches from the wall, you know, nobody's going to notice that. You're still going to have a beautiful landscape, and the flame is no longer, or the vegetation is no longer a threat to the structure. By the way, landscape can actually help defend your house. If you keep in mind, if you are, so when you design, if you think about it so that it allows fire to come into it, and, you know, just imagine if it was on fire, would it be a threat? And, you know, kind of build your design around that. So as I was saying, the immediate landscape area, to the extent of the home ignition zone, which is out to 100 feet or 200 feet if you're on a slope. I found this picture was really interesting. These look like older buildings, stucco, tile roof, but all the ones around it burnt down. You know, I thought, well, why? I mean, who knows, really, who knows? But maybe because all the other ones were going structure to structure, they were so close, and this one had this vegetation, this insulation of vegetation around it that prevented the heat from actually igniting something. And although I would say this is probably a little dense, if somebody was asking me to evaluate this landscape, I would suggest they start taking some stuff out, probably move it a little further away from the house. But so as far as the landscape goes, I do landscape, and I really like a beautiful landscape. I don't like a moonscape. And so I encourage you guys to be clever and play with it. If flame length is twice fuel length, and you want to have, you know, a 15-foot tree, move it 35 feet away from the house, and, you know, it's not going to be a problem. And you can plant it in kind of a mosaic of lower plantings that don't create this giant flame or this wall of flame, and plant in, as I said, mosaic. So there's little spaces in between, so it doesn't run unimpeded. It actually kind of has to hop from fuel source to fuel source. And those, the trees and plants will absorb and hold some of the embers or heat. You know, if it's convective, if it's blowing, there's winds blowing, just like trees disrupt the wind on a farm. You plant them at the edge of farms so the soil doesn't blow away. Trees can actually take the heat and prevent them from hitting your structure if you do it, you know, with some forethought. It's really important to clean those ladder fuels. Trees will burn, but you won't get that crown fire unless there's that continuity from the ground up, right? Trees don't burn just at the top. So that's pretty much it for me. I just wanted to talk about some of those things being the leading areas where structures actually, you know, and how they actually ignite. And I encourage you guys to embrace the challenge. Like, you know, think about it, have fun with it, and think about, you know, how can I make this really, how can I make this design better and lower maintenance for these people in the future? Because that's really going to be the key, I think. I find again and again where houses ignition becomes a risk is when people aren't keeping up with their maintenance. So, all right, well, thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Seth. We're now going to have Emily present.
Just need Seth to stop sharing his screen.
Ah, yes. All right, everyone can see my screen and hear my voice. Okay, great. So thank you everybody for being here. I'm really excited to join this panel, and we're talking about some pertinent issues today. And my talk is going to focus around your defensible space and taking those state minimum requirements and applying them to more of a localized level and how we customized it to the Santa Lucia Preserve in particular. So you should see a link to this presentation in the chat. It's a live link. You can open it up yourself. You can visit it afterwards. But if you want to follow along on your own screen, you can. All right. So the Santa Lucia Preserve is located in Central California. Specifically, it's on the northern end of Big Sur and between Carmel Valley area. It's a super rugged terrain, and it has many different types of habitat. The preserve is about 20,000 acres, and the whole concept of the preserve is to preserve the land. So we do have 300 parcels that have been established. However, out of the 20,000 acres, 18,000 is actually untouched wildlands. And the wildlands are managed by our nonprofit organization, the Santa Lucia Conservancy. So we have homeowners that align with this vision and mindset to live and intermingle with this exquisite wildland area and to preserve the land at the same time. But then now you see that they are also considered to live in the wildland urban interface, which requires from the state to have your defensible space. The preserve is also has a history of fire. And here in this map, you can see the old burn scars. So the preserve is outlined in this black border. And this is the 2016 Sobranis fire. Earlier in 2008, we have another large fire in Big Sur called the Basin Complex. And then more recently, these two fires to the right are the River and the Carmel fire. So multiple times the preserve has experienced wildfire even at its own doorstep. And with this fire history, we are also considered to be in the high to very high fire hazard severity zone. So the WUI interface, the high fire hazard severity zone, these are challenging conditions to build a home in and be safe from wildfires. On a broad scale, the preserve is doing what it can to protect and prevent wildfires. We are working with our local fire agencies, our partnering organizations, and aligning with local communities to plan for when that fire hits, how we're going to create the fire and fuel breaks, evacuation plans, and maintain the fuel on a broad scale. Another part of that is just making sure our major ingress and egress routes are clear for safe passage. But ultimately, it comes down to the homeowner and how they manage their defensible space and their home hardening. So we're going to talk about the more fine scale approach here at the preserve. Defensible space is from the Public Resource Code 4291. It's required by the state of California for homes that are located in that WUI area. Specifically, the preserve, because of its mindset of land conservation, we took the state minimum requirements, which are broadly cast across the state. But as you know, California has many different types of habitats, microclimates. And so we're taking these guidelines and we're sort of customizing it to a more of a local interface.
And that's what I'm going to go into right now. What we have at the preserve is called lot-specific fuel management plans. Each home is required to have a lot-specific fuel management plan that stems from those state minimum requirements. So we are absolutely prioritizing the home and the structure's safety, but we're also considering the different types of habitat and how you can still maintain that safety while keeping the natural beauty and health of that landscape. These lot-specific fuel management plans are based on habitat types. So in your house, you get about 150 to 200 feet of defensible space, and those zones are dedicated to the different types of habitat. So we're going to start to talk about each zone. The first one being the non-combustible zone. And in this talk, I'm going to focus heavily on this 0 to 5 foot zone and give you just a little bit of history. This zone was recently enacted into California state law in 2020. Before that, there were only 2 zones, the 0 to 30 foot and the 30 to 100 feet. So they enacted this new zone because it has been proven scientifically and from history of fire behavior that this is actually the most critical zone. Seth hit this point many times, but this is the zone immediately next to the structure and 5 feet out. It is where embers are likely to ignite the structure and where you have a lot of those fault points, such as windows and exposed eaves and vents. So in this picture, this is a home at the preserve and what a good example of a non-combustible zone is. So they've brought out the vegetation, they have a lot of hardscaping, and that's one thing that we recommend or advise landscape architects at the preserve is that they use this hardscaping as much as they can. Currently, regulations do allow plants in this zone. However, because it was recently enacted as a new zone, the guidelines are still underway and they will not be published until the end of this year in January. Once they are established, the movement right now, there's a working group and there's a lot of talk about how we're going to do this 0 to 5 foot zone. They're really edging towards the more conservative side of having nothing combustible in this zone. So moving forward, I would just keep that in mind. Worst case scenario, if they do implement these guidelines, they have 0 combustibles, that's including plants. But the implementation component of that is obviously going to be really challenging for existing homes and for those in the process who do want a little plants. So right now there's some wiggle room, but I would just advise that conservation component of really using hardscaping in that immediate zone. This is an image that is showing how ember storms happen, and these embers can just find pockets near at the base of your structure and start to assemble that greater heat force that can ignite your home. It's also, again, one of the most critical zones. And now I'll go into some examples of what homes at the preserve are doing to retrofit their landscaping in order to meet the standards of the non-combustible zone. So in this example, you can see that they keep that immediate zone really low level, well irrigated grass, and they've removed the mulch and put gravel there. And it still looks pretty good. In this case, you do have vegetation in the 0 to 5 foot. This is considered a non-woody, well irrigated and herbaceous plant. So one thing I would like to mention is that even though we do have plant lists here at the preserve that are telling you which plants are native, which plants are fire resistant, drought resistant, the plant lists are not a cure-all. You can have all the fire-friendly plants that you want, but the main point of this talk and this whole webinar is maintenance. So you just have to make sure that you're maintaining these plants, even if they're fire-friendly. And in this case, these plants have grown together. So they were once placed separately and had that nice vertical spacing and horizontal spacing. And now they've kind of grown together and they're causing one big continuous patch of vegetation right next to the home. So even though this is allowed, it's starting to become a little unmanaged, and I would advise creating more separation between these bushes. Here's another good example of using vegetation in that 0 to 5 foot zone. Again, you can see that this is very well irrigated. It's very soft, non-woody. The only issue that is here is that they do still have mulch, and mulch is not permitted in this zone. So they would need to retrofit this to get rid of that mulch and just make sure that these plants don't create a catchment for dead leafy material. They're pretty close to the oak trees, and that's a possibility. In this example, someone had removed mulch and overgrown shrubs, and they replaced it with a non-combustible gravel, and they planted a few, greenery in the process. You can also note that the home structure is built with more flame resistant materials like stone and stucco. And in this case, people love their vines, and a lot of homes around here do have very well established vines, roses, all kinds of things. So this homeowner was willing to go pretty far in retrofitting their home. You can see that they've removed all the mulch at the base. They're going to replace that with gravel, but they did want to keep their vines. So we advised to cut them down from the eaves. Like Seth mentioned, the eaves aren't flammable themselves, but if there's a heat source next to them, then that can become an issue. We also advise to cut below the vines so that there's no ladder fuels leading up into them. And the plants that they did select for this zone are also, again, well irrigated, non-woody, and herbaceous. Here's an example of a maintained lawn. Lawn is currently allowed in this zone. This is also well irrigated. You can see that the landscaping just beyond the zone has been also well pruned from the base and also away from the eaves. So this is a good example. And as you know, wooden fences are not allowed to attach to the homes in that 0 to 5 foot zone. So this person is in the process of getting rid of that wooden highway that can lead the fire up to the home, and they're starting to replace it with non-combustible material. At the base, you can see they're doing the same thing. They took out the mulch, they pruned their shrubs, manzanita, which I will talk about a little later, but it can just get wild. And in this house, it was all continuous before they did this. So this is a good example of a home that called me up and said, hey, what can we do? We were dropped from our insurance. They were carried for multiple years, who in the past did agree that their defensible space was adequate, and then all of a sudden it's not. With no reason. You may be experiencing a lot of these situations, but in this case, I visited this area with our fire marshal to determine what they can do to help their chances of getting that insurance. And that's one other thing to consider building a home in a high fire hazard area and a WUI is, will you get insured, even if you're meeting all the homeowners' dreams and goals of building this dream house? So in this situation, I would ask the audience, but to save a little bit of time, the things that I would change in this and that are required are removing that wood mulch within the 0 to 5 foot zone, and then reducing the shrubs that are right next to the window with wood mulch at the base. So windows are weak points on homes. You don't want to have a lot of heat source right next to those windows. I would also prune back the trees from away from the eaves. Here's a quick photo that I snapped right before these guys started to hammer down on this little guest house, but the homeowner was making some dramatic retrofitting in the non-combustible zone. So in this case, you can see that right up to the house, they had a lot of vines that were based on mulch and leading up to the eaves. And when you pull those vines away, it captured a lot of dead, dry material. You can also see that the trees are coming right up to these eaves too. So what they did was they took out a lot of vegetation, they took out the wood mulch, and there's a big bag of gravel here that they're going to start to incorporate throughout the home. Our next zone, moving on from that most critical one, is the landscaping zone. And this is throughout the entire property that landscaping is allowed. And we just advise, it's not so much about the plant list, vertical of the plants. So this is an example of how manzanita can get unruly. It collects a lot of really flammable dead material. But in this image, you can see here that they've pruned down to that home. A lot of this native grass that's also well irrigated. We have the driveway zone. Some people have long driveways and they're up this rugged terrain. So the main thing about this is to make sure it's safe and approachable for fire resources and for you to be able to escape. So in this concept, we advise 15 feet of vertical space, which is state minimum requirements, but on the edge, we would like to see at least 15 feet of vertical spacing from the edge of pavement. So really giving that wide berth of that driveway access and making sure those type 3 engines can get up and protect the structure. So the grassland zone is out to 30 feet from the house, and we just require to mow it down to 4 inches. And we advise a seasonal approach to that to support the native grasses that grow and reduce the weeds. So in this case, we suggest mowing in the late spring. And this guy is just about to tackle his grass. And you can see that the issue here is he's on a steep slope and the grass is leading right up to all the manzanita that has now grown together as continuous fuel right up to the house. With the slope does increase flame height and fire behavior. And so those flames can double, triple, and just get really big in size depending on the wind too. So we want to just reduce the flame height near the home. The next is the Oak Savannah Zone. And in this situation, you can see that there's a lot of this noxious woody weeds. These are all poison hemlock. And when they dry out, they're like kindle. It's really a hazard. And they're leading right up into this low hanging branch. So the possibility of catching this canopy on fire is high, especially because it also is on a slope. So this homeowner had knocked all of that down. And they are currently in the process of chipping what remains of that area. So that it will all be gone. They will have a nice clear hillside that they can now manage and enjoy. The next is the Oak Woodland Zone. And this is actually considered blue ribbon habitat for fire behavior. And the reason why is because the tree canopies, when the trees are well pruned and maintained, they offer a shaded ground cover, which keeps the ground cool. The leaf cover helps from weeds and other things that would otherwise become ladder fuels from coming up. And the fire behavior in this area is more of a creeping, crawling. So you're not going to have very high flame lengths in this area. We just advise that when you do prune the trees, because they're oak trees, they do require a certain time of year to be pruned. Otherwise, they're susceptible to disease and other ailments that can damage the tree. So we just provide some seasonal guidance for that. We want to keep all the leaves there, but not if they're going to be in piles above 4 inches. So here's an example. Another zone is an oak shrub woodland, which is basically the oak woodland, but when it's unmanaged, completely untouched. Now you have shrubs and things that have been there for a long time. And in this case, another example of a noxious weed that we have here is called French broom. And when this dries out, it grows very tall and it becomes a ladder fuel next to the home. So this homeowner went and cleared out those weeds, and you can see that it just brings out those beautiful oaks. It changes the view, and now you can go and walk through those, and you're also reducing the mitigation or the spread of these invasive weeds elsewhere. Now we have the Chaparral Zone, which is a very special zone for us in Central California. And the thing about this zone that creates that fire hazard is that a lot of these fire adaptive plants are very flammable. They love fire. Otherwise, fire is very healthy for this environment. But in the case of it being right next to your home, we want to make sure that we reduce the possibility of a wildfire from catching the structure. So in this case, a lot of these plants will grow right back up from the root base and they recover quickly. So regular maintenance is required for this area. And the first attempt is just to taking it all out, most of it out, so that it can grow back and you can start to select for the young, healthy plants. So this person, who also lives on a really steep slope, knocked out a lot of this coyote shrub that was next to his home, cleared up the trees. And also another component is that this is a fire road that leads right up to a bloodline to one of our fuel breaks in the back. So now he's created that safe passage for fire personnel during the fire. And in the event of a wildfire, it was right up to this house. So now we're just preparing for that, if it were to ever happen again, to just be more likely to survive with the structure, increase the safety of the homeowner and those fire personnel who will be up there. We have the coastal scrub, and it's very similar to the chaparral. Things grow right back. And in this case, the homeowner was living on another steep slope with the chaparral coming right up to his home almost. And what they did was they created more of a patch or a feathering into the mature manzanita, chaparral, and coastal scrub. And they selected for the young manzanita, they pruned them up, they removed all the dead material. And now this is a much safer environment to defend this space. And it looks beautiful. This is right after it happened, so it'll start to look a little more natural. So that wraps up my talk. I just wanted to mention that we are a FireWise community. There are benefits to insurance for FireWise communities out there. And this, like I said, the presentation is available to you. If you have any questions, here's my contact. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emily. That was really great. I especially appreciate the before and after photos. Next, we have Kevin Kamnikar. Take it away.
Emily, can I get you to stop sharing there, please?
Oh. Thanks.
So as I was introduced, my name is, let's see if I can get the start here. My name is Kevin Kamnikar. I'm the Division Chief and Fire Marshal for Monterey County Regional Fire District, and I was asked to speak on some wildfire behavior. I'm just going to kind of hit the basic thing because it can get kind of complicated on some of them, and basic structure protection or strategies that the fire department uses when we do go on wildfires, and kind of hit on some things that Seth had talked about, and also Emily. It's a lot of the same things talking about defensible spaces. So first off, what is a wildfire? Well, it's basically an unwanted, unplanned fire that we have a main objective of trying to put it out. A lot of people see different fires, columns of smoke out there and things, but a wildfire has jumped its boundaries or is no longer in the area that we actually want to keep it at. And with what a wildfire is, about 90% of them are human caused, with the other 10 being natural, and in California would be the lightning causes. In 2020, I think we had about over 5,000 lightning strikes just within our region. They can be intentional or unintentional. The intentional is someone that's actually trying to light that fire with malicious intent to harm someone or damage the property. And also the unintentional can be where somebody had lit the fire, but it was accidental. Like, for example, like a backyard burn, if they were doing it when it's burn season in the backyard where it escapes, dragging chains on a trailer, or just mechanical malfunction or something. There most likely will have multiple wildland urban interface areas, like Emily was talking about earlier with the WUI and wildland urban interface. You know, when fires do move, they don't have boundaries when they start spreading. And with the most recent fires, they actually start moving through multiple counties. Back in 2020, we had the August complex that went through 7 different counties, and most recent one was the Dixie fire that had spread through 5 different counties. If it's not controlled, we've actually seen them on TV. I'm sure everybody has, and seen the news and pictures and things that pretty much will destroy anything within its path. This picture was kind of interesting because we were actually up trying to protect some other stuff and didn't have our back watched, and started spotting behind us. So you can see the fire engine down in the lower left where we were actually trying to get out before it trapped us in an area where we didn't want to be. So these pictures, I just like to show these on which we're going to move into why fire burns, how it burns, what we can actually do to slow it down. So the one on the left this was the Dixie fire last year, where just kind of showing some of the fire behavior. Watch the trees, watch the fire on the ground, look at some of the spotting out there where you can see spotting where my cursor is. You'll start to see it. It's just a real quick video. We're trying to keep it from jumping Highway 89, like I said, during the Dixie fire. 13 minutes later, look at the fire conditions where we see the trees now moving. The fire is actually spread and starting to get up into the trees where we start getting the crown fires. And over on the right, you saw the sign where the winds were whipping pretty good where they had dropped down on us. So I just like to show these two videos just to show just in a 13-minute time frame what had changed where we had fire crews starting to move in different directions to start doing structure protection. This was actually in Lake Almanor West off 89 up by Lake Almanor. So the three things, like I mentioned, that we have with moose fires, we call it the fire triangle or wildfire triangle, is the weather, topography, and fuel. This is basic just for the basic how wildfires move. Weather, there's not much we can do about. We got our wind, temperature, humidity, precipitation throughout the year. Our topography, we can't do much about that. The only thing we can do is choose where we put our house. But most of the times we want to put our house where we have views or privacy, that type of thing. So we put them up on hills or slopes or up on the ridge lines. So not much that we can do with either one of those things, but what we can do something about is fuel. And Emily hit quite a bit on the fuel reduction. Seth hit some on it a little bit. And we're going to get into a little bit more on defensible space with what we kind of look for and why we use it. So just to talk a little bit and hit a little bit more on the weather, we all know that weather pretty much drives fires. It's the humidity that's low, it's the high temperatures, it's the winds. We get the wind-driven fires that create what we see here is big columns of smoke that's become plume-driven. Fire can create its own weather. I've been on fires before where we get the lightning coming down from the columns of smoke, which when you start getting the ice caps up on the top, the white clouds, they'll start creating rain, thunder, lightning. And what happens is we get the in drafts up there, which create the updrafts, which sucks in a lot more oxygen feeding the fire. One of the big things that happens is when we get up there is we start creating the rain that can start falling down in and evaporate in the column of smoke and cool down the column and what's going on in there, which get our downdrafts also. And when the downdrafts happen, that's when we get the fires that drop down on us or the columns drop on us, spreading the fires out. And that's what actually happened with the river fire here in Monterey County when that thing started spreading, as we had a column collapse on us, which put the embers and everything out in all the different directions. As I mentioned, topography. This picture doesn't do this justice because this is actually a pretty steep hill in front of it with some drainages, and the drainages don't really show up that well. But it's the houses that are built up on the hillsides, the different aspects on the south basin slopes where we get the drier vegetation, and the drainages, box canyons up on the saddles, and also up on the ridge lines. The biggest thing, like I mentioned, is just having them in the mid slopes, up on the ridge lines, on the south basin slopes, that type of thing where we get the drier vegetation. And then also the fuel, which we'll talk about the defensible space here, and I will hit on it a little bit more because that's a pretty important part, is doing fuel reduction. And I think as Emily mentioned, just the hardscaping around the house and also creating that firescaping to prevent fires from moving in towards the homes. So just to talk a little bit more on defensible space, Emily kind of talked about it, Seth talked a little bit. There's 5 minimum things that we look for on the defensible space, and this is the absolute bare minimum that is required through Public Resource Code 4291. It's your zone 1, and I'm not going to talk about zone 0 yet, but zone 1, which is your lean, clean, and green. Emily mentioned it as a landscape zone. That's your 30 feet where we want our green, well landscaped, our manicured things free of all the dead, dying, that type of fuel. And then our zone 2 is our 30 to 100 feet, which is our fuel reduction zone, where we're going to kind of thin out our brush, break up that continuity, limb up our trees, and also cut our grasses down to 4 inches. The other three things that are included in the defensible space is, which Seth had mentioned, was removing all the debris out of the gutters and removing all the debris off your roofs. The last thing is just making sure that limbs are away from the fireplace or your stovepipe, or I'm sorry, the chimney or your stovepipe. Make sure that that's away about 10 feet if you are burning solid fuels in there. So that's the bare minimum on what a defensible space is. There's a lot more things that control this. We want to make that driveway enticing so that if we come up to a house, which we're going to talk about triage in homes, is that we want to make sure that the firefighters can get up there and also that they can get down if need be in the event of an emergency. So, and we also look at address posting, we look at other things. Talking about the zone 0, Emily hit on that pretty hard, so I'm not going to dwell on that too much, but that is where a lot of research has been done on how homes burn down. It's the embers that actually hit the side of a house, whether it's wood, stucco, what it's made out of, but they fall to the ground, and whatever's on the ground is going to get things burning. On top of that, it could be your garbage cans, it could be your patio furniture, anything, your pots, anything that could be up around that house. In addition to your zone 0, that also goes around the deck. A deck is an extension of your home. So the 0 to 5 needs to continue around the deck also. So just talking about it, which Seth talked a little bit, is the embers. About 2/3 of the homes out there that are destroyed during a wildfire are due to the embers that are flying. So you can see the home in the back where there's no flame front anywhere now around there. It's the embers that actually get up into certain areas, and you can see the house starting to ignite in the back there. The picture on the right was one of our captains actually during the Colorado fire that we got a picture of while he was trying to, and that doesn't do it justice either because it was a video, but of trying to escape some of the embers. So I think Seth mentioned it's not so much the flame front that actually is going to get the house. We can go get away from the flame front and do what we call as a fire front follow through or flame front follow through and go back to that house and extinguish things as we see them. So it's not so much the flame front that's going to be hitting the house and cause the problems. It's the embers that are out in front of it and what is left over after the house burns. Houses take a long time to burn from the outside in. So I would keep mentioning is just the embers. So going into some of the strategies from fire behavior is why do we do, or what are the benefits of defensible space? It's twofold. One, it gives that kind of break between your fuel from where the fire is moving towards it and starts hitting that zone 2, or if you've gone even farther than that, is going to start to slow the fire down. So regardless of whether it's a ground fire, a crown fire, an independent crown, active, whatever you want to call it, it's when the fire gets to a certain point, it's going to slow down because the continuity of the fuel's been broke up. And when it gets through zone 2 and gets to zone 1, that's where it should slow down tremendously. So it's kind of a buffer for your house from where the fire is burning. But one of the biggest things is for our firefighter safety. You can see this is one of my favorite pictures where this guy was doing his best to try and keep that fire from getting into that deck. But you can see us also see in the backyard, they've got a pretty good 20-foot hardscaping, not just with the pool, but with the concrete. So keeping that fire away from it, keeping away from the house. And he was just trying to cool down the deck, which later on we pulled him away. So those are the two things that we do, just kind of give it a buffer for the home and also give us a little bit of protection for our firefighter. Some of the things that we do, and I'll talk a little bit about the strategies that we actually do when protecting structures. And it's not a lot, it's just going to go into some of the things that we look for. And what we do is called structure triage. So structure triage basically goes with whether it's defensible or not defensible. Defensible, there's two different things. We got prep and hold, and we also got standalone. So this is kind of a prep and hold where there's tactical challenges that could be involved here, whether it has things on the roof, a little bit of brush that might be a little too close to the house, something that we can put a firefighter in the back and have a safety zone and feel safe enough to put people out there behind there to try and defend that structure and keep embers from getting to it, or if embers do get in certain places, extinguish them. The next one is just a structure triage. This is one of the famous pictures that's all over the internet. So this one isn't mine, but it's a defensible standalone where we drive by this house, we look at the house, we determine that this thing has all the fuel management that's been done in both zones and even zone 0, and it's got a good lean, clean, and green. And that this house, we felt strongly enough that where it sits, that if a fire moved up to it, the fire would die down by the time it got to it. After the flame went through or the fire went through, we would go back in just to make sure that embers didn't get anywhere where they should be, and go ahead, continue on extinguishing anything and just kind of do checkups over periods of time. The next ones are non-defensible prep and go. This is where we do what we can around homes, whether it's removing some of the furniture around the house, removing some of the combustibles around the house, doing a little bit of yard work, but not too much. So this picture right here, and I don't know if you can see the one on the right, but there's two homes here. These people absolutely refused to help us out or do anything that they were supposed to, and we didn't have the personnel to try and save it. It was kind of a sad situation. We put resources where we felt safer, and by the time we got back here after the fire front had gone through, the house was more than 50% involved, and which is what we can consider a total loss. So this is when we kind of preach that the fire. And then of course, the non-defensible rescue drive-by, and sorry about the alarms, I can't turn them off. So the structured or the non-defensible rescue drive-by where we're just showing up to a house, and if there's somebody there, we're trying to get them out of there, getting them in our engines or escaping out. Some of the things that we actually do, as I mentioned a little bit, we'll go around the house. We will remove combustible items from around your house, whether it's your patio furniture, putting them inside the house, moving them outside of zone 1 into zone barbecue pits, your propane pits or tanks, whatever we can help do to make your house a little bit safer in the event of a wildfire. Emily had mentioned the fences going up to the house, and Seth actually mentioned where if you got a gate big enough, and one of the things I just try to tell people is if you've got a gate up against your house, open that thing before you leave, or we will, and if we can't open a gate, we'll actually remove the fence or part of it, at least 5 feet up against the house to kind of break that wick up. Like I mentioned, if the time allows, we'll do some yard work, not too much. If we can get things, leaves away from the deck, things off the roof, we'll try to do it. That's kind of a low priority, but if we do have the time, we'll do what we can. When people do evacuate or leave their homes, we ask that you lock or unlock all your doors, but keep them shut with your windows. If we walk around your house, we do see some things are inside the home that's up against the windows. We'll remove some of the curtains, we'll remove some of the furniture towards the center of the home, just to try and get it away from the windows so that the radiant heat doesn't get things going. You can see on this one, which we've wrapped plenty of homes where we can get the aluminum wrap. It's a little bit more than just aluminum, but some of the wrap where we'll wrap homes, some of the more historical homes we've done it on, and also set up the little sprinkler systems where we get it through our logistics on fires, where it comes with a portable tank, a sprinklers, hose, and a portable pump, and we'll set it up, drop some water in there from a water tender, and as fire gets closer, we'll kind of start it up if we don't feel it's a good place for us to be. The WUI placard for some of those of you that have been in areas, you've probably seen these on your mailboxes, on your fences, on your trees, things like that. But these are some of the things that the fire engines actually carry. And when they do the triaging, they'll fill it out so that as crews rotate through every 24 hours or whatever rotation they're on, they'll look at this and see, is this somewhere where we can get up in? Is there a water source? Is there defensible space, people present, and what other hazards are there? So just to go in, one last thing that I always like to cover is for evacuations. In Monterey County, there's 3 things. I only list 2 here because the first one is just kind of an advisory that county OES will send out saying that, there is a fire in the area, however many miles away. When they give the warning, that is the time that you actually should be packing your car, getting all your valuables in, get everything out of get your car out of your garage and get ready to go. It's not the time where you can see these people up here where the lady's actually walking into her house as the fire's licking the back of her house, or the guy in the street that's looking at the fire. This is the time that you should have been already getting ready to go. And when the order does come in, that's when you should be in your car and going. A lot of people try to wait and see if they can wait it out or fight it out. But the problem is with some of the driveways and areas in Monterey County, especially in our fire district, Monterey County Regional, where we have a lot of the places out in Carmel Valley, we got narrow roads and driveways. So as fire engines are coming in, people are trying to get out. And one thing that the fire department is probably not going to do is start backing things up. So we always recommend you get the order, go out. There's nothing wrong with leaving when the warning comes in. And then if you're not registered, you can register with alertmontereycounty.org. And the last thing, like I said, when you're told to leave, leave. This picture, I don't know if you can see it, but right down there in the bottom, there's 2 headlights where this guy thought he was smart and went through a road check or roadblock up there in the Dixie fire up 89 and 36 and came out at about 100 miles an hour trying to get away from that fire on the right side. And what this picture doesn't show is all the spotting that was happening in front of him. With that, that's me, Kevin Kamnikar. There's my email, there's my phone number, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Kevin. That was great. Emily and Seth, all wonderful presentations. We're going to start our Q&A. We've got about 18 questions. We're going to try to get through most of them. And so I'm just going to go ahead and start reading them off, and then we can answer live. So the first question that came through, please speak to the fire resistance of a green roof. Green tray roofs, extensive roofs with 2 to 3 feet of earth and planting above. What kind of landscape works?
Well, I would say obviously less fuel, don't plant a lot of large woody stuff on the roof and hope that it doesn't burn. Grasses are good, but short grasses. And again, I'll say this a million times, but it's maintenance, right? So that's a great possibility, but if someone doesn't maintain the roof, it can be a fire hazard.
Yeah, and just to jump on with what Seth said, they are in code that you can put them up, but there are some restrictions on how high the grass is. They've got to have a certain water supply up there. You got to have ladders to be able to get up on the roof. There's a lot of different things that go along with it.
Next one, do you have any experience with solid concrete structures, possibly with stone facing performance and wildfire? With extensive glass walls and such concrete structures, would Fusible link metal fire rated shutters in front of glass help?
Yeah, there's a lot of things there. Yeah, I mean, in our fire district, we do have some all concrete homes, and I forget what they call them, but we're actually getting one built right now up in Tehama. So there are some houses out there that are concrete. There's a lot of different things that you can have on there just for the shutters alone to close in front of the windows. But like Seth was mentioning earlier, that there's a lot of different things with the glass. There's actually triple pane windows out there. So there are a lot of things that go along with the glass.
Great. Many jurisdictions require gutter guards or something similar per CBC 705A.4 roof gutters. What other options would you propose to meet those code requirements?
I always recommend less gutters. Anywhere you can that you don't need a gutter, if it's not serving a purpose, get rid of it.
Yeah, and under Chapter 7A, like they mentioned, that is a California fire code that came into, or California code for the WUI that came in, I think, effective 2008 or something like that, where if you've got gutters, you have to have covers over the top of them. Yeah, I agree with Seth. Get rid of the gutters if you can.
Mm-hmm. Can you comment on the efficacy of Icfs, insulated concrete forms, structures, and wildfires, particularly if they incorporate non-combustible roof systems?
That's what I was thinking of, was the ICF. Yeah, it's fire resistant, and I think it's a class 1 maybe building product, which has a low flame spread, so which is good. I don't know if you guys know anything about them, but
yeah.
I mean, cement's pretty fire resistant.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think one of the things is we also try to balance, okay, what's the carbon impact when it comes to building with concrete. So it has its advantages and it has its disadvantages.
The thing is, going along with that, and there might be other questions that come up, even with the coastal fire that happened last month before down there in Laguna Niguel, those are a lot of fire resistant homes and 20 of them burned down. So it all depends. It can be the best building material, but if you don't maintain your defensible space, your 0 to 5, that type of thing, you can still have things that happen.
Yeah. Here's one. While stucco is a reasonable exterior cladding, many here install stucco-like exterior insulation finishing systems, Eifs, using rigid foam backing. Canadians refer to as solid gasoline. Do you find Eifs clad structures relatively fire dangerous?
I think it's about the time of contact, right? So if you have enough heat for long enough, things go wrong. So once again, it's that 0 zone you need to keep clear so there's no fuels there to have that heat source.
Are there specific California building code requirements for materials that can and cannot be used for buildings that are in a high fire zone?
Yeah, so that's that's the WUI Chapter 7A in the building code.
That's right.
That pretty much covers everything from the exterior, the roof, the vents, decking, fencing. It covers windows. It covers pretty much everything if you're in the WUI.
A person asked, is any wood allowed, even redwood, for the siding?
Well, I mean, if it's already there, it's existing non-compliant. But under new codes, you got to have you got to have a Class A buildup assembly underneath it if that's what you choose to do, if it's allowed in the area.
Right, so
But
that
even like-
would
even like
require,
redwood decks and stuff, but you can't even build a redwood deck with the wood framing underneath under Chapter 7A anymore if you're in the WUI.
Mhm. Is there a ratio for slope to flame height that can be added to the 2 to 2.5 times flame height to vegetation height? I think Seth had answered that.
I mean, that's pretty, there's a lot of variables there. With a little wind that can change, you know. But I think it just generally they just double the flame length on a slope, right? Or double the clear space around it, you know, the treatment, the structure that is.
And I just saw someone pop something up in the chat in regards to heavy timber on a deck. Yes, it's got to fall under the ASTM or STS, whatever it is, SME or whatever it is. It has to pass certain tests to be able to be used if you want to use wood on anything or vents or anything else. So yeah, it's got to pass certain things for the flame spread.
Another person asks, mentions, I've observed that concrete structures and straw bale structures have not burned during fire NATOs. Have you ever seen concrete melt?
No.
So I just had a client up in Napa a couple of years ago, and we did an exterior fire suppression system for them. And they didn't do their solar array, and they didn't do their cement water tank. And the fire burned so hot it destroyed it didn't melt the tanks, but it destroyed the tanks. They had to rebuild them.
Are there any published planning guidelines for planning several dwellings within large 200 acres or more ranches addressing fire breaks, building location recommendations? That sounds like an Emily question.
Maybe Kevin might know.
I think it'd probably be like a local ordinance.
Yeah.
There's nothing that says that you can't have, like, there's setbacks you have to have, like Monterey County has certain setbacks, but it would be an ordinance within the certain counties, what they allow. Like out on Highway 68 area, they might have, you can't build any, I don't even know if this is right anymore, but back in the day, if you had 30 acres, you could build 6 homes on that 30 acres. If you wanted to have one house on 20 acres and the other 5 on the other remaining 10, that was fine, but it had to be split evenly along things. So I'm not sure where or what the ordinances are on a lot of them.
Do you have a good bibliography or list of guidelines through which architects may design more fire defensible projects? I know I've gone on to the Fire Safe Marin. They have a really good website on ideas. Do you guys have any thoughts on that?
Just the building code 7A.
Yeah.
Kevin, is there any data that has been collected by CAL FIRE or other agencies on how buildings that were designed under WUI code have fared during fires compared to houses before WUI was implemented?
Chapter 7A.
Chapter 7A.
That's a good question. I mean, like we talked earlier, defensible spaces are, well, I didn't say this, but they're basically designed for average weather. So regardless of what your home is built out of, if you've got anything glass or anything on there that when we start getting the winds start moving, or you get a fire tornado, which they're very rare, but we get them and start throwing rocks and things like that, that it doesn't matter what your house is built out of, that the fire's gonna get it. So as far as data, I mean, it might be out there. I don't know.
I recently watched a working group presentation based on the 0 to 5 foot regulations that are being developed right now. And there was someone that presented that there was a beneficial statistic after the implementation of Chapter 7A. I don't know what that number is exactly. I want to say 50% of homes were better off, but that's something that is out there, and I'll look for it and see if I can supply it for you guys.
Okay, great. Thank you. Someone had a question on attics. code requires them to be ventilated, but the West is primarily low humidity. What about sealed attics with mechanical ventilation?
I think they're out there. I know they're out there where when it gets hot, they got the fans inside of there that'll automatically kick on to get the heat out of the attics. I don't know if anybody else
I've actually done a lot of retrofits where we go back and we seal up all the vents and then we put in a low voltage fan and we force air through. So there's 2 vents instead of 20. Or I actually just did a house in the preserve that had 461 vents on it. So
that might have been when we were on yesterday, Emily, because they had a lot of vents.
They're all like this big, just
yeah,
that you-
exactly.
1/4 inch.
Someone made a comment about membranes, so I'm guessing the WRBs are petroleum-based and outgassed from high heat. All that is needed is an ignition source and the attics ignite regardless of the type of roofing.
I don't know what membranes,
Like the
for the flat roofs type thing, or?
The
no,
roofing system.
I think it's either whatever weather resistant barrier on the roof or wall.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why I talk about that maintenance thing, or if you have a metal roof, like really watch the edges, especially if you have a gutter underneath, because they do lift up, and then right there, totally accessible is, tar paper or something that's very ignitable. There's a whole bunch of different things that are used for that, those roofing systems, but most of them are flammable.
Mhm.
Fire has to hit it for a long time to get it to its ignition temperature, get it going.
Here's a question I think a lot of us are concerned about. Can someone address the many insurance companies that are canceling non-renewing homeowners insurance in Northern California due to fire danger?
It's you, Emily.
Yeah, I can speak on that a little bit. We have had several homeowners here that have had long-term insurance policy holders, and then in the recent year or two have been dropped. And it's frustrating because they're not getting specific reasons why. And there's evidence in the past where these same insurance companies approved and aligned with their defensible space and all their efforts that we're putting into maintaining their homes defensible space. So there's obviously been a huge change because of the increase of wildfire risk, that insurance companies are backing out of certain areas that are considered, based on their proprietary mapping criteria, not insurable. And right now, Insurance Commissioner Ricardo Lara is working on trying to shed more light onto those criteria that insurance companies are using to explain and provide the homeowner more of an opportunity to correct whatever is the problem. And so at this point, there's a lot of people that have been referred to at the bare minimum, the FAIR plan. And a lot of insurance companies will provide checklists for wildfire safety, but it's kind of across the board right now. And honestly, even on the state level, some of the regulations are a little bit ambiguous. So there's a lot of change right now to align all of the same criteria that everyone's aiming for to be successfully fire resistant. And there's going to be movement on clarifying that.
So I can speak to that a little bit too. I just did a kind of a seminar with somebody who she's an insurance broker, and that was what she was talking about, is what was going on in California. One of the interesting things she told me was that only 4% of the homes insured in California are in high-risk zones. So I thought that was pretty amazing. Everybody's talking about all these people being dropped, but there's only 4% of California homes are actually in the areas that are being dropped. But having said that, there's a lot of insurers are dropping people because they have too many clients in any one area. And what happened in Paradise is there was one primary supplier of insurance that was up there. Everybody had them, and they basically went insolvent because so many houses burned down. And so the lot of people who are being dropped for no reason, it's because the insurance has it too many insureds in any one area, and they want to diversify it into other communities.
Really interesting. All right, we've got about 4 more minutes before we have to wrap up. We still have a number of them open questions, and we're going to do our best to answer them. There was one, does the roof slope, is that critical, whether it's a flat or pitched roof? How does slope?
Well, the steeper it is, things will roll off a lot easier, even if it's roof or leaf debris, needles, things like that, and embers. I mean, they can roll off it.
Mhm.
Yeah, it matters more if you're under canopy too. I mean, you know, if you're out in the middle of a sandy dune, it doesn't really matter too much what kind of roof you have. But if you're under an oak forest, you know, you want to think about how many times you need to climb on the roof to clean it.
Can you repeat the height clearance around a dirt driveway through a forested area?
15 feet.
Okay.
We say 15 feet high, 12 foot wide, but then we do a 1 foot air on each side. So it's basically 15 high, 14 wide.
Okay, I'll type that in. Do you have any thoughts on exterior mineral wool insulation like rock wool? It has a very high flame point. Seth, you're shaking your head there.
Oh, yeah, it's someone talking to me outside the window. Yeah,
Okay.
but I mean, you know, layers of defense are great. Again, you know, you have to be careful about putting too many layers on, because maintenance is the biggie, right? You know, you have to come back and check, and you know, sometimes your defense can be the problem, right? If a bunch of leaves or something or debris is caught up in it, and then, you know, it's the nook that the stuff's ignited from, you know, the place it ignited from.
Mhm. What are your opinions on managed retreat? In your opinion, should more communities in the WUI be looking at it as a long-term approach?
I don't know what that is for evacuations, or what does that mean?
A
Not sure
managed
either.
retreat. Like, what about, what comes to mind is, should communities kind of band together to create some kind of evacuation plan or even a fuel management plan that saves, you know, saves the homes? I know, Seth, you had mentioned something that it really only takes the first home really to be defensible, that protects the remaining homes in that.
Yeah, there's a
neighborhood.
shadow effect. So the first home, it goes both ways, right? If the first home in the line is properly defended and it doesn't ignite, there's a shadow behind it that is protected. And if that first home does ignite, then there's the opposite. You know, there's a shadow, there's a fire spread that's very similar to that defensive shadow. And it's just going to go house to house. The interesting thing about houses, so once it's in a community, the interesting thing about houses is the stuff in them burns hotter and longer than like natural fuels, trees and stuff like that. In the live fire demonstrations they did for the HIZ, and they built those wooden structures at different distances, the 2,000 degree, 200 foot flames, it took 50 seconds to consume the fuel and move on, and for that radiation to start dropping, where a house will burn for, you know, hours. So that's why they're so effective once the first one gets lit, igniting the neighbors, is because it's just that heat source for a protracted amount of time.
Okay, and I see here in the Q&A what the intent of that question was. Do you rebuild after a disaster? Should you, or,
You know,
for example, should Paradise have been rebuilt?
One of the most amazing things I've seen a lot of fire, and a lot of people burn out. And it's, you know, I don't want to discount anybody's pain or discomfort, but usually people are better off afterwards. And in nature, fire breeds resilience, right? It takes out the weak. And I think it does in human communities too. You know, you come back and you're stronger for it.
Talked about Libby, about coming together as a community, and Emily chime in on this too, since you're the Firewise guru up there in SLP. But you know, it's not just about insurance companies, just not about grants. It's about bringing communities closer together and making them more fire aware. And you know, like Seth was saying earlier, if it's just that one house that's cleared out, that's not going to do much good. You got to get everybody on board and everybody look out for each other and take care of each other. And if someone can't, then come together as a neighborhood and help each other out to maintain the properties. So that's one of the beauties of Firewise, is that it does bring community. I just did a presentation last night and there were 28 people there, and there were people walking in that live in the same neighborhood that have lived there for years and didn't know each other. So they were introducing themselves to each other, and we're coming up with a plan on what they can do to help make their areas safer out in Carmel Valley.
Yeah,
That's
and
great.
just to, you know, beat a dead horse. It's like in a community, it's not 1 + 1 is 2. It's something greater. So the more people buy in, the stronger that resistance, that resilience becomes.
Well, I think that is a great point to end on, coming together and acting as a community, and that it's not just an individual fight here. So I want to thank all of you for presenting today and for everyone being on this webinar. If you have made it this far, AIA California staff will submit you for AIA CE credits, and it should appear on your transcript in a few weeks. And as always, more resources and tools can be found on the AIA California website. Thank you again, and we'll see you at our next climate action webinar.
Thanks, Libby. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.